A rancher lived alone for 12 years, until an auction mistake gave him a family of 5. The prairie hadn't changed in 12 winters. Same wind, same dust trails ghosting across the open flat, same leaning fence, tired of standing upright. Every morning at sunup, he watched the same 5 crows circle the dry patch just beyond the cattle pens, like they were waiting for something to die. They never landed, just circled and left. Same time, every day. He'd stop wondering why the rancher's hat sat low over his eyes, casting a shadow that made him look like part of the land. His beard was gray now, more weary than wild, and his back curved slightly from years of mending posts, lifting feed, and bearing silence. The only sound on most days was the slow creak of his old rocking chair on the porch, pushed by the wind. When he wasn't in it, inside the house, nothing moved unless he did. The hearth fire was always built before dawn, even in summer. 1 coffee cup used, the second always clean but untouched. There was a second room in the house. He never opened it, not in 12 years, not since the day they wrapped his wife and child in a wool sheet and lowered them into the red-brown earth behind the barn. A fever had taken them both before he could ride for help. The grave was marked with a single horseshoe nailed to a fence post. Nothing more. He wrote sometimes, in a letter that used to belong to his father, not full sentences, just memories like sketches. Wind came from the south today, cows to quiet, or saw a fox near the well again. He never wrote names. They hurt too much. The townspeople had stopped asking about him. He came in once a year, maybe twice, bought oats, medicine for the cattle, new nails for the barn roof. He never stayed long. Didn't drink, didn't talk, just tipped his hat and rode back the way he came. But this year was different. His mule had taken a limp. He figured he'd look at the auction listings while in town, maybe pick up another for cheap if no one was bidding hard. He hadn't planned to linger, but something kept his boots in place that morning. The auction yard was crowded, sweat and tobacco and the noise of men who hadn't worked land in years, but still wore boots like they had. He stood at the back, hat low, hands folded. The sun made everything taste like dust. Lot 27, the auctioneer shouted, family of 5, woman and 4 young'uns, can cook, work, all walking on their own, no diseases, no debt. There was laughter, some cruel, some just bored. Hell, that's cheaper than a mule. Someone sneered behind him. He squinted toward the lot pen, but couldn't see much through the crowd, just movement. He figured it was some joke listing, maybe a mule named Mama and for goats as young'uns. Ranchers sometimes pulled tricks like that to make bidders pay attention. No one raised a hand. The crowd chuckled and turned away. Then a voice, sharp and low, came from his left. Go on, by her then. Ain't like you got anyone waiting back home. He didn't look to see who said it, just raised his hand. Out of spite, maybe, or stubbornness, or because something deep inside him stirred, something old and unfinished. The hammer fell, sold. The auctioneer barked. To the silent fella in the back, the crowd parted a little, curious now. Whispers trailed like tumbleweed, but the rancher didn't flinch. Then he saw them, not a mule, not goats, a woman, tall, sunburned, her eyes squinting not from light, but from shame. Her dress hung loose on her frame, faded and patched. Behind her stood 4 children. The oldest boy had a jaw already set like a man's, though he couldn't have been more than 12. A girl next to him clutched a bundle wrapped in cloth, maybe food, maybe nothing. The little ones held hands, twins maybe, eyes darting like rabbits. They waited, silent, like livestock, like they'd done this before. The rancher didn't speak. He only nodded once, slowly, then turned to mount his horse. He didn't offer a hand, didn't offer comfort. He simply rode, and they followed, dust rising behind them. No one in town stopped them. A few watched. Most didn't bother. He didn't ask names, didn't give his. The trail home was long. Hours passed under a sky that threatened rain, but never delivered. The wind picked up near the old crossroads. The children stayed close behind the woman. The twins began to stumble, tired. He slowed his pace, not enough to look soft, just enough to keep them from falling behind. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had dimmed. The sun, half swallowed by the horizon, cast long shadows over the fence line. He rode through the gate without looking back. They hesitated. He dismounted, opened the barn, and pointed, blankets and hay inside. He said, warm's in there. If you want it, Then he walked into the house and shut the door. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the chair. The wind rocked it without him. He stared at the second cup still clean on the shelf. He did not pour it. At some point past midnight, he lit a lantern and walked out to the barn. Quiet, as always. The children were asleep. In a pile like pups, the woman sat upright, alert, but didn't flinch. She met his eyes. He nodded once. She nodded back. When he returned to the porch, 5 crows were perched on the fence. Still 5. Always 5. And for the first time in 12 years, the silence in his bones didn't feel empty. It felt full. Heavy with something he couldn't name. Yet, the first days were quiet, but not peaceful. The woman kept her eyes down, her jaw set. The children stayed close to her shadow, never speaking unless one cried softly in sleep. They didn't cross the porch, didn't touch the door. They slept in the barn even though he never told them to. He laid fresh hay in the far stall, left an old wool blanket folded by the water bucket. Come morning, it was gone from the stall, but never mentioned. He didn't ask them to come in, just left food by the back step, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a tin of beans, salt. She took them without thanks, but he noticed she left the cloths washed and folded again near the well. The woman rose before dawn and worked as if the land owed her nothing, and she meant to ask for even less. She swept the barn floor, cleaned the trough without a word, hauled water as if she had always done so. He watched from the porch, one boot rocking against the dusty post. She scrubbed her hands raw with the pump and boiled cornbread without asking if he wanted any, but she left pieces in a tin on the porch each night, even when he didn't eat the first. The children, they didn't laugh. Not yet, but they weren't ghosts either. The eldest boy had a name he hadn't offered, but his eyes had already seen too much. He held himself like a man, watched his siblings like a sentinel, never flinched, even when the rancher rode past on horseback too close to the fence. The boy just stared, like steel being forged, quiet and burning hot. The girl, not yet 10, had the eyes of a reader and the silence of a fox. She mapped everything, where the fence sagged, how long the well pump took, where the dog liked to bury its bone. He saw her tracing something into the dirt one morning, a map maybe, or a story. She looked up once and he looked away, and the twins, to small things no older than 5, always hand in hand, skittish and quiet. They never strayed from the barn without her, but they watched everything, even when pretending not to. He never asked about their father. They never asked why he was alone. One morning, he found the boy carrying firewood. Without being told, the boy didn't wait for thanks, just stacked the logs and walked off. The rancher added an extra egg to the pot that morning. The woman didn't tell her story, not in words, but she told it in how she moved, how she flinched when boots thudded behind her to fast, how she didn't take food unless it was offered more than once, how she boiled her clothes before wearing them again. She didn't speak of men. She didn't ask for safety. She just built it quietly. One evening near the 6th day, she climbed the porch steps holding a pot. Steam curled up from it like a promise. She set it down beside his chair, then sat on the edge of the steps, her back straight, her dress clean, mended at the sleeves. She didn't look at him, just watched the fireflies rising slow from the grass like tiny stars lifting off the earth. He tasted the stew, salt, beans, meat, something else, rosemary maybe. It was warm. It was good. He said, "It's quiet out here." She didn't turn her head, just said, "Quieter than we're used to." He nodded. That was all. The next day, she mended his old coat, hung it on the porch rail without a word. He ran his fingers across the stitching, neat, tight, honest. That night, the rocking chair didn't creak as much. She'd fixed its right leg with a sliver of cedar and 2 nails. A few mornings later, he heard giggling, faint, brittle, like a match trying to catch flame. The twins were crouched in the dirt near the porch, showing him how to play a marble game they made with pebbles and bottle caps. He didn't understand the rules, but he played. By noon, the girl had drawn shapes. In the dust around the porch, each child's initials inside a heart, and beside them, a fence. His fence, their mark on it. Later, a scruffy dog showed up limping by the barn. They named it Tatter. The girl fed it scraps. The boy built it a box. The dog stayed. So did the laughter. Bit by bit, the boy watched him fix the wagon axle one evening, then without a word, grabbed the second hammer and held a nail in place. They didn't talk, but the sound of hammering felt like something being born again. One morning, he saw the woman near the well, standing still as sunlight. Her hands were red, wrists raw. He walked to her, held out a tin of balm. She didn't meet his eyes but took it gently. Rumors drifted in like dust storms. A neighbor rode by slow one afternoon and stopped just long enough to ask, "You keeping them, or just giving them shelter till the next buyer?" The rancher didn't answer at first, just stood on the porch, arms folded, then said, "They ain't mine." But he didn't say they were leaving either. The neighbor nodded, but his eyes said more. The next day, someone else rode by, same kind of stare, same kind of pause. The town was starting to hum with questions. That night, as the lantern flickered low in the main room, he found something new on the table. It was the auction paper, the original deed, and a small cloth bag beside it, tied tight with twine. He untied it. Coins, more than he'd have guessed. She stood in the doorway, not in the shadows, not ashamed. Her voice was steady, soft. "We can leave now, if you want. You is gone." He looked at her, at the tiredness that hadn't yet left her bones, at the quiet strength in her spine, at the small scratches on her hands from fence wires she never complained about, at the dog asleep beside the twins by the hearth. He didn't speak, but he didn't reach for the coins either. He folded the cloth quietly, let the coins settle in the small pouch. No flame flickered in his gaze as he picked it up, only quiet resolve. Winter was already whispering through the bare fields, and he said simply, "Winter's too close to move. Children." She didn't say thank you. Her hand shook less the next morning, though something in her spine had straightened too, day by slow day. Her past began to unfold in the dust and toil. It came out in how her fingers trembled when hauling water, and the way she flinched at heavy boots. He learned she once had a man by her side, sometimes gone, sometimes home late. Tales whispered he'd wandered off and never returned or died in some way she'd never say. Debt collectors came calling. They forced her to attend a public sale when she refused to serve. That's how she ended up on a livestock block, and the hammer came down. He didn't see her weep not until she drove the trough full, then halted, knuckles white, looking out across his land as if trying to reconcile something no one should bear. He didn't comfort. He just handed her a cloth rag and kept working. He began building for them not a barn stall, but a room. It rose next to the house, new beams, rough cedar siding, a door that closed without a creak. He made the eldest boy hold the hammer, said nothing, just offered the tool. The boy stood there, heart thumping, waiting, then hit the nail straight. The girl brought small carrot seeds. He helped her press them into neat rows. Finger by finger across the soil, she smiled as the dirt fell back in place. One morning, before dawn, he found the twins asleep on the porch swing, blankets tucked up under chins. They'd waited for him to wake up. He breathed in the hush. They didn't speak much, but their proximity spoke louder than words. And then something small happened. He opened his old journal. A page read, "Wind howled near the barn," and beneath it, in her handwriting, "You kept breathing." That was brave enough. He stared at the line till the ink blurred and closed the book, heart full. Word got back around town. The auction man returned one afternoon. He stood in the yard, papers in hand, eyes hard. "My mistake," he said. "They were misfiled property. I'm taking them." The rancher looked at him. No flinch. He said quiet, "I don't own them, but they're here, and they ain't going." The auction man's lip curled. He told the townsfolk later. He'd been stiffed. Folks side-eyed the rancher, wondered if he'd gone soft left alone all those years, now using orphans for company. But the woman changed. Everything. Late one afternoon, she climbed onto the back of the wagon in town dusted, sunburnished, strong in posture. She spoke clear. "We were not property. We were survivors." He offered us peace, not prison. The murmurs quieted. Heads bowed. Even the blacksmith's lad whispered, "She's right." The twins felt one evening near the barn tumbled from the swing, and they spoke it so softly. He barely heard it. Pada, he froze as if the word unlocked a door in his chest. His eyes blurred. He didn't correct them. He didn't deny it. That night, under lantern light and star-blurred sky, she came to the porch and placed her hand on his chest, just rested it there. He felt the rise and fall of her breath. He placed his hand over hers and stayed, silent. The fire in the hearth flickered, the wind in the chair still. He wasn't the man who buried his wife and child that winter too long ago. He was someone, knew someone who chose on purpose to build a world around others, and the silence between them was no longer empty, but full of beginnings he never thought he'd feel again. A hush settled over the ranch that morning as the auction man appeared again, this time with two burly strangers at his side and a stack of papers in hand. He stepped forward onto the porch, eyes shadowed, voice low. They belong to the man I work for. You'll hand them over. The rancher moved with measured calm. He met the auction man's gaze, then turned and invited them inside. The kettle sang soft on the stove. He poured coffee into chipped tin cups and set one before each man. The hired one sipped in silence. The auction man glared. He set down their cups. They hadn't been emptied. He didn't smile. He said, "They are mine by deed, but you'll need to bury me if you want them back." In the distance, he heard the sound of soil shifting hoofbeats on soft earth descending toward the yard. One by one, townsfolk stepped through the gate. The blacksmith with soot on his apron, the pastor with his collar, even the barkeep wiping his hands on his beer-stained shirt. No one spoke. They just stood. Their presence filled the gap between statute and justice. The auction man looked past them, eyes narrowing. He had deeds. He had words. But he lacked what those gathered carried in their stance of quiet loyalty, born of shared glances, of memories made in sweat and silence. He scoffed. "You'll regret the day you let your heart speak louder than law," then turned and walked away, shoulders stiff, the hired man falling in step behind him. Another hush. Then the wind lifted a scrap of paper, the auction's original, listing tangled in fence wire. It caught on the post where the 5 initials were carved, the spot now bristling with fresh flowers. The woman stepped forward, cupped the paper in her hands for a moment, then tucked it into her apron. She looked at the children, then at the rancher. All returned to the barnyard together. That evening, she called them close by the fire. She said, softly, "We are safe, really safe." The twins nestled in her lap. The girl leaned into her side. The eldest boy touched the rancher's boot with a small smile. They believed her, and something like peace arrived. The next day, the rancher stood with the girl at the gatepost as they sawed and hammered the hinges into place. Together, they built a gated doorway to their new lives. The boy hung wind chimes from the porch beam. Their soft tinkle blended with the creek's gentle song, and the rocking chair rebuilt with care never rocked alone again. Dusk fell in a sky bruised with purple and rose. The half-grown moon rose, casting pale light across the yard. The family gathered. The children's initials 5 in number glowed. In the flicker, he knelt, carved a 6 beside theirs. His silence wrapped around them. The woman sat beside him. She pressed a gentle hand to his chest and said, "We weren't your mistake." He breathed, eyes fixed on the new initial in the wood. After a long moment, he replied, "You were my chance." In that quiet twilight, each soul found its place. The fence held them not just with wire and boards, but bones and bloom, the bones of past losses, now laced with the bloom of second chances. Sometimes, family doesn't come by blood or law. It comes by the courage to keep the porch light burning, even when no one knocks. For 12 years, the wind rustled the gate. The fire crackled low. The world was vast beyond them, and yet they had everything they needed.